some of our friends from Africa mentioned that COVID-19 is not their top one concern in Africa. However, COVID-19 is a familiar topic nowadays because in terms of the influence of COVID-19, regardless of its severity, in your own country has already been around talking about COVID-19, we think about many positive, negative effects. For example, our kids cannot go to school, the factory stop production, no restaurant to go to, and a lot of events canceled. However, every coin has two sides. Do we also see its positive side of the COVID-19? Due to the pandemic, nowadays more and more population in the world have a higher consciousness of healthcare, and in general, people are having an increasingly higher consciousness and awareness of medical science and also healthcare. Also, we see the rapid development of logistics industry and also other industries such as role in this COVID-19 epidemic. For example, the one good perspective because COVID-19 a very huge event that is from the clinical treatment way of COVID-19, how to treat COVID-19, how to prevent COVID-19. And also, we will also talk about some of the practices in China and you know the Chinese way of doing things and also Chinese philosophy as well as Chinese how the Chinese people use PPT. Today we will choose one typical Chinese term that is called the integration of the Chinese and Western medicine. And this is a typical medical word that is also the combination of the traditional and modern medical science. So we will review the fighting against the COVID-19 from this perspective. And experience work hospital and this hospital was founded in 1955. Xinyuan Hospital is a large integrated AAA grade TCM hospital that integrates medical services with scientific research, education, and healthcare comprehensive. Xinyuan Hospital is also one of the traditional medicine operation center of the World Health Organization. In the past 65 years, it has received visits and exchanges from more than 1,000 groups from nearly 100 countries and regions around the world. At the same time, it is also the International Science and Technology Cooperation Center of Ministry of Science and Technology, International Human Resources Training Base at Ministry of Commerce, Advanced Stroke Center, and Chest Pain Center. And in fighting against the COVID-19, particularly in the year 2020, Xinyuan Hospital achieved the two first. We are the first national TCM medical team centered in Hubei province, China. And in April 2020, after the COVID-19 in Wuhan gradually was in control, but rising trend. Therefore, at that time, we voluntarily donated the medical devices and the protection equipment materials to overseas market. Also, some of the traditional Chinese medicine medical team. And our hospital was the first national TCM medical team to foreign countries. And actually, in addition to the COVID-19, Xiyuan Hospital always was participating due to COVID-19. We already realized that it is a kind of epidemic of contagious disease, and it demands global cooperation instead of just fighting alone by one single country or one single region. Therefore, Chinese government opened its information to WTO and other countries. Also, for Xiyuan Hospital, we are actively involved in the international collaboration, and we conducted 22 international academic exchanges in the year 2020 to share Chinese wisdom and experience with the world. Also, the Xiyuan Hospital realized many cooperation and collaboration with our international partners to solve the bottlenecks, such as the international standards establishment and with a lot of achievements. So now we start our presentation formally after the brief introduction, and my presentation will be in three major parts. And while you are watching the PPT and listening to my presentation, you are welcome to ask questions through drop your comments in the comment box, or for example, raise your hands to ask questions. Then I can adjust and answer accordingly. So first is about the TCM and about its rich experience in combating epidemics. Maybe you will come to understand that now we are talking about a kind of epidemic starting from 2020. Why we should trace back to thousands of years ago? Then we need to review the actually, the medical science accumulated experience throughout history. Let us see, for example, the physics. When Newton established his science, and many physicists, they were very thrilled and excited as Newton's theory already explained the natural phenomena. But later, when people gradually expanded their perspective of microscopic and macroscopic, and they then find that Newton's science cannot fully explain the whole phenomenon, then there appear two what we call dark clouds. Then we have Einstein with the theory of relativity, and the other is quantum physics science. So through this, we can find that for each subject, actually, we need first to identify the problems, and then we need to accumulate experience during the exploration of the science. And it also applies not only to physics, chemistry, mathematics, but also medical science. And we'll see that disease and disasters is the X-ray.
And among the three, epidemics is the one that has threatened most lives in the world. And in the world, in history, there are many records. For example, in Europe, in the medieval age, there's a black fever that killed millions of people. And even in the 20th century, we have the Spanish flu and Asian flu, SARS, and other contagious diseases. And I believe you know all that. And these are the real examples of how the epidemics infecting people worldwide. And in the history of China, there are also many classic traditional Chinese medicines that were formed after the epidemics. So I would like to ask you whether we have given very good control to these epidemics. The answer is a yes, because if not, probably we don't have the opportunity to sit here and talking to each other now. Because every time we have an epidemics, the traditional Chinese doctors will accumulate these classics, and they will put these therapy in these classics. So a lot of the traditional classical medicine books recorded these formulas and the therapies that were formulated after the epidemics. And we can see every about 6 years, there's a major epidemic. And in recent years, every 2 to 3 years, there is a big epidemic. On this slide, you can see two pictures. You may not be able to read these Chinese words, but you can see this is a very old book from its print. And that book was actually written about just 2,000 years ago. And the picture below was was a big book of the book compiled in the Qing dynasty, which was about 3,300 years ago. So these books are still in use until today. Later, I will also give you more slides showing these classics. Now, let me elaborate on how the Chinese medicine played its important role in fighting against the COVID-19. I will give you 3 groups of statistics. The first one is 91.5. According to the incomplete statistics, as of 2020, more than 91.5 of the COVID-19 patients in China used the traditional Chinese medicine. And the second number is 19.6%. Among them, more than 60,000 people in Hubei province used traditional Chinese medicine. Of course, in other provinces in China, there are also many people who use traditional Chinese medicine. And the third number is 90%. Observation of the clinical efficacy showed that the total effective rate of traditional Chinese medicine is over 90%. So just now I give you the 3 numbers to show you the efficacy of a Chinese medicine in fighting against COVID-19. Now let me give you a different perspective. We know that the traditional Chinese medicine runs through the whole process of prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation. And the status of the people can be divided into 3 stages. The first one is before the disease. The second is during the disease. And the third is after the disease. Because of such a division of the status, everybody, no matter what age group or where he or she lives, he or she is definitely in one of these 3 stages. And in these 3 stages, we provide prevention and the treatment and rehabilitation accordingly. And the Chinese medicines runs through this whole process: prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation. Now let me walk you through one by one. The first stage is the prevention. The story has to start from where the medical team first arrived in Wuhan. At that time, there was quite many general public that has showed the symptoms of flu and cold, and there was a panic of the COVID-19. So they were very eager to have the diagnosis from the hospitals. At that time, this panic spread over the society. So the medical team, we have put forward our methodology. We need to control the symptoms, and we can also need to ease the anxiety of the patients. So according to their patients, we have worked out the therapy, and we deliver the Chinese medicine to the general public. And after that, a lot of them have relieved the symptoms, and even they started, they showed no symptoms after taking this medicine. And this also helped to stabilize Wuhan at that time. Now let me move to the second stage, that is the treatment stage. Clinically, we have a segmentation of the patients of the COVID-19, and it is roughly divided into the common type, and the other is the critical type. So for these different people, our target is very clear. Through our treatment, we hope that we can reduce the mortality rate for the critical cases and help to relieve the symptoms of the normal cases. And we also have conducted the research. After using these traditional Chinese medicine, the mortality risk rate can be reduced by 87.7%. And the third stage is a rehabilitation stage. After these patients are recovered and go back home, there is a long period of rehabilitation. And because we need to further help them to get rid of these symptoms, and they also need to have their nucleic acid tested regularly. And we have conducted a comparative research. The first group, we use the traditional Chinese medicine, and second, we don't use traditional Chinese medicine. And we find that for the second group, the re-positive rate is only 2.7, and the other group is as high as 15%. So with such numbers, in the rehabilitation stage, for all the patients, we provide traditional medicine so that we effectively help with the control of the re-positive rate in the rehabilitation stage. If the COVID-19 is compared to an examination, I believe with my brief introduction, you should be able to reach a consensus. That is, the Chinese medicine has gained an excellent mark in this examination. And now let me move on to what we do to get this high mark in this examination. Just now, I give you the classification or segmentation of the two types. So I will also follow this division. First, for the critical cases, for this group of patients, we integrate the Chinese medicine and the Western medicine. First, we provide basic treatments. The core is the oxygen therapy. I believe you have learned about this through the media, or you may have even experienced yourself. When you have contacted COVID-19, you use the nozzle catheter to intake oxygen. So this blood oxygen saturation rate is very important, especially for those elderly people that is immunocompromised. we also provide some additional medicines. So at this point, you may feel that for this therapy, compared with the other therapies used in Western countries or in other countries, it seems that it is similar. That's right, because this medicine is recommended by the WHO as the standard treatment. So now you may have a question. Since it is the standard solution, that means that every country, they use the same solution or therapy. Then why for these critical cases, our mortality rate and the relief of the symptoms in China, it is better than other countries? That is because on top of these basic treatments, we provide traditional Chinese medicine, i.e. this by observing these symptoms of the patients, such as the fever, high fever or low fever, whether they cough, whether there's a diarrhea, whether there's a like yellow flash, or whether loss of consciousness, we use a different Chinese medicine dropping. And we will also observe these, if there is any inflammation of the lung symptoms or these elderly people, we will also apply the traditional Chinese medicine intravenous for them. So this Xi Yanping intravenous, you can see its a function, its ingredients, etc. So you can browse these information after the lecture. I need to point out the traditional Chinese medicine recommend compared with the other traditional Chinese medicine, it is different. According to our knowledge, many countries rehabilitate or health maintenance products. However, these traditional Chinese medicine intravenous, they are defined as OTC, and we need to go through the clinical study, preclinical and the post-clinical study before they can be launched. So for its security and efficacy, you may have full confidence in that. And with this slide, you can see these intravenous are placed in bottles. They are liquid. You can see the ingredient in the bracket. So see, a lot of the ingredient, they are large plant botanical names. So for modern medicine, talk about in after modern wanted to, but different countries have a different level of heritage of the traditional medicine. But we can see
其使用纯传统医学的方法。
Further the cooperation between the traditional Chinese medicine and the Western medicine, not only belonging to different sections, but actually one doctor, he or she needs to be trained both in Western medicine and traditional Chinese medicine. So in other words, the doctor himself or herself is familiar with both traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine. Therefore, when the doctor is practicing, then he is under the discipline of the rules, management, and administrating the doctors, and under such a framework, the traditional Chinese medicine enjoys the same status together with the Western medicine. And in China, we have three categories. And one is what we call the Western medicine. And then the second is the herbal Chinese medicine. And then the third one is what we call the prepared Chinese medicine or Chinese patent medicine. And for the Chinese, for the Western medicine, for the Western medicine doctors, they can give prescription in Western medicine as well as prepared Chinese medicines. And for those who are particularly trained in the Chinese medicine, they can even give prescription of the Chinese herb formulas. For example, if you feel your stomach has some problem, like the stomach problems, and then we will give you the Western medicine inspection or testing. And this kind of testing can be prescribed. This gastroscope can be prescribed by the Chinese medicine doctor, by the Chinese medicine doctors. Therefore, as we can see, the one practiced in Chinese medicine can also be eligible to do something that is purely Western medicine. Therefore, they can combine the advantages of both Chinese traditional medicine and Western medicine to offer the best solution or best combined integrated solution for patients. And we also take full in consideration of the actual situation of those patients of COVID-19. Then actually we can offer the Chinese medicine to the COVID-19 patients. We have the 3 TCM formulas and 3 traditional Chinese patent medicines. And let us explain these 3 TCM formulas and 3 medicines one by one. So the first one is called a Qingfei Paidu decoction. And you see the familiar Chinese ancient book again. So this book has a history of more than 2,000 years ago. And in this book, dating back to more than 2,000 years, actually the current Chinese medical doctors, they also learned and benefit from some of these prescriptions and the decoctions. By revising and modifying the decoctions, we offer this Qingfei Paidu decoction. And this is the first prescription issued by the National Administration of Traditional Chinese Medicine to the whole society, which is suitable for mild, moderate, severe, and critical cases. So here, these are the basic formula. Also, you can see the ingredients and the amount used for each ingredient. So you may examine the detailed formula after the lesson. And as you can see, the administration, we have the traditional Chinese herbal pieces in decoction, 1 package per day, and take warm twice in the morning and in the evening. 1 course of treatment is for 3 packages. Also, we have conducted some clinical tests on the Qingfei Paidu decoction. We find that the decoction was used by 2014 diagnosed patients, and the effective rate is more than 90%. No adverse reaction were received. So there's no one case changed from mild or moderate to severe. So let us see the second decoction. This one is called Hua Shi Paidu formula. This one is from the ancient book called Treatise on Pestilence. This one is based on the prescription recommended by National Diagnosis and Treatment Protocol and is optimized by the medical team of China Academy of Chinese Medical Science. Here, as we can see, that this is the evidence of Huashipeidu formula in our clinical trial. And in the clinical controlled trial conducted in hospital, 75 severe patients were enrolled. We find that the negative time of nucleic acid and the length of hospital stay were shortened by 3 days on average. In addition, we had 452 cases of mild and moderate patients enrolled in a randomized controlled trial conducted in field hospital. And we also have the liver and kidney functions were tracked and tested. No drug-related adverse reaction were found. We also carried out the animal test on mouse model infected with a virus. And by using this test, we found that by using this Huashipeidu formula, the formula can reduce the viral load of lung tissue by 30%. We are also very keen on knowing delta because delta can carry much more virus. Then it is more contagious. Therefore, the viral delta as well. So due to this COVID-19 control and fighting, we have this Lianhua Qingwen capsule. Actually, the Lianhua Qingwen capsule was not developed during the treatment of COVID-19. It was developed in the year 2003. Again, Chinese medicine used this for COVID-19 patients. We found that it has a very certain effect, and it is particularly suitable for patients with severe fever and dry stool. For this one is our evidence on Lianhua Qingwen capsule. I'm introducing the traditional Chinese medical products. I will first introduce the basic information and also offer what we call the double-blind controlled randomized test to prove the effectiveness. Are not trained in modern science, or what we call the randomized, and also can be repeated in tests. So sometimes some people may argue that the traditional medicine cannot be repeated and cannot be tested in a randomized and controlled method, such as RCT test, evidence-based medicine to prove our safety as well as our effectiveness. That is why you can see that in my PPT, I will offer such evidence. I will not elaborate on this part, but you are encouraged to review this after the class. And the second is called the Jinhua Qinggan granules. So this one was not developed for COVID-19. Actually, it was developed in 2009 during the H1N1 epidemic. It actually suitable for patients with mild fever and a severe headache. So it's mainly for those with just ordinary average symptoms. So this one is evidence of Jinhua Qinggan granules. And here, this is called ephedra. Ephedra is a frequently used drug. And actually, ephedra is very strictly controlled in many countries for fear of what we call the ephedrine. And because ephedrine is a very important ingredient to produce kind of stimulant or even some illegal drugs. However, I want to emphasize that actually the ingredient or the content of what we see, the ephedrine, is very low in natural ephedra. Therefore, it is unlikely people can get addicted to the ephedrine by using natural ephedra, for example, quickened heartbeat and other, and increased blood pressure. And let us see this WHO statistics. And according to the statistics of WHO, about 6% to 10% of patients with mild COVID-19 become severe. However, here in Wuhan, as we can see, that the percentage is much lower.
In this study, we have included altogether 251 cases. The youngest one is 23, and the oldest one is 58. The average is 44 years old, and there are asymptomatic cases, mild cases, and moderate cases. So when these patients are included, they have different symptoms. And they are also what we usually encountered clinically, because there are a lot of symptoms that they are related to the chronic diseases, and it is quite complicated. And now let's look at the result. And first of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Health of these countries, because they allow us not to use any Western medicine. Rather, we use a pure traditional Chinese medicine for treatment. In April 29th, 2020, they were admitted and started to receive a treatment. And 12 days later, that is on May the 11th, half of the patients, i.e. 121 patients, they were discharged from hospital. And 29 days later, the last patient was discharged. And among them, it only took 4 days for this viral assay conversion, and the maximum is 29 days. And all symptoms were improved significantly. Of course, there were also some side effects, such as diarrhea, bloating. This table shows the symptoms of the patients when they were admission, we scored them, and when they were discharged, we scored them again. So you can see the drop of all these symptoms, showing that all the symptoms were relieved significantly. And please pay attention to two numbers. The first one is a fever, and the second one is a vomiting. Why these two? It's because only these two symptoms, when discharged, they were close to zero when discharged. 0 means there's no symptoms. And how about those with scores? That's for you to study further. We find that for these patients, when they were discharged, actually, a lot of them still has some symptoms. And this is what we worried about, because they don't have the symptoms threatening their life, but these symptoms didn't go away. They will not threaten life, but they will threaten the life quality. A lot of patients, they will suffer from these symptoms for very long, as long as 6 months. For example, they cannot smell any smells, and the loss of appetite, and this compromised their life quality. Next, let me introduce you our medical team and how we work in Wuhan. These pictures show our medical team from the moment of a departure and the moment of returning. There's an important milestone that I would like to show you. It is the April the 23rd, 2020. If you know the Chinese culture, you know the most important festival is the New Year Festival, Chinese New Year Festival. On the state, no matter where you are, you all need to embark on a journey back home. You know, China is a country with big population. So on January the 23rd, that is the last working day before the Chinese New Year, there were many, many people on the road back home. And the city of Wuhan is a mega city with 10 million people. And there are a lot of many people moving inward and outward. But because of the epidemic, on the morning 10 a.m. of January the 23rd, there was the lockdown order was released. And this includes the airway, waterway, land, motorway. So after the January 23rd, the city was locked down for 76 days. So in these 76 days, that is the most critical stage for fighting against COVID. And we managed to control this disease in 6 months, in particular in Wuhan. And we have won the victory of the COVID-19. And since then, we still have some individual cases here and there, and these import cases, but in general, we are in good condition. We are in good shape. And this has a lot to do with the 70 days of the lockdown of Wuhan. We often say that we lock down one city to save one country. And Wuhan has paid a high price for the whole nation. However, this is what Wuhan did for the country, and this is also what China did for the world. On January the 24th, we got the order from the Ministry of Health asking the Xiyuan Hospital to be prepared to go to Wuhan anytime. On January the 25th at 12 o'clock in noon, we gathered together in Beijing railway station and started our journey to Wuhan, which is 1,000 miles away. And then in the next 2 months, all the medical team, there's zero infection. After 76 days, they return safe back to Xiyuan Hospital. Our medical team arrived at Wuhan late that day, and without any rest, we moved to Jingyingtan Hospital. And because of the epidemic, we get to know this name, Jingyingtan Hospital. Why? Because the Jingyingtan Hospital is the specialty hospital in Wuhan for contagious diseases. And so there is if there's a COVID case, the first destination is the Jinyintan Hospital. So Jinyintan Hospital was heavily loaded at that time because it need to help so many patients. And our medical team on January 25th, which is we are the third medical team to be dispatched to Jinyintan Hospital. And we took over the critical ward, and we promoted the traditional Chinese medicine, and quickly we controlled the mortality rate for the critical cases. So in this picture, in this slide, you can see we work in Jinyintan Hospital. On the picture on the lower right corner, you can see these patients, they were discharged. And they were the last group of patients we treated in Wuhan. And with their release, discharge, that means our work in Wuhan is closing to an end, which also means that the battle for Wuhan was also closing to an end. And the field hospital is also very important for winning the victory of the control of the epidemic. Why we need to build these field hospitals in such a short time? That's because we noticed, we were aware that the disease was spreading fast and far. So it was really worrisome. For these patients, within a short time, they incur a high risk of a disease spreading. So we need to screen these patients, and they admitted them into the hospital. But for any country, in face of these epidemics, they all suffer from the deficiency of the medical resources. And at that time, we started the cooperation for many industries, such as logistics, transportation, the guarantee of the living resources, the drainage, the construction, the infrastructure, energy. So all the industries work together and gather in Wuhan to build these field hospitals. So within a very short time, we built more than 10 large-scale field hospitals and providing nearly 50,000 beds. And we managed to treat more than 40,000 patients in Wuhan and nearby. So we built this network of treatment. This slide shows the medical team working in the field hospital. The field hospital in the Wuhan community in Wuhan, all the diagnosed patients were admitted to these field hospitals. And so that outside the hospitals, it is safe and there's no risk of spreading of the virus. So all we had to do is to make sure that all the patients were taken care of so that we can say that the disease itself is under control. And later, we have some mild symptoms and asymptomatic patients. They also revisited the hospitals for after check. So we continue to provide these traditional Chinese medicine to them, also to the grassroots level community hospitals. This slide shows the meetings. You may not be able to tell who is who, but I will tell you that these are just those patients wearing, they are just the doctors wearing goggles and the white coats. After the daily work, they will have meeting and to discuss and report on the cases. Because elsewhere in China, they are all urgently waiting for the data of these COVID-19 cases. So it is their work In the daytime, they take care of the patients. In the evening time, they collect these data and transmit these data to elsewhere in China. And now we are updating these collected documents to the 8th version. So now let me move to the discussion part. First is the use of antibiotics. Let me give you one real example. In the last 1 month, when talking with some foreign colleagues, they sent me some pictures and consulting me for some therapies. Because in some country, it may not be convenient to go to the hospitals, so they consult me online. So I noticed for this patient, they use 3 kinds of antibiotics. And they also use the zinc vitamin C, zinc supplement, and a VC supplement. At that time, I asked him, do you have a COVID? And he said, yes, I'm diagnosed with the COVID-19. But I learned later that he showed no obvious symptoms. So I feel quite dubious because obviously he's using antibiotics. Why? Because for inflammation diseases, there's a bacteria infection and a virus infection. And for COVID, it is more bacterial infection. So for this, actually, we don't recommend the use of antibiotics because you need to show symptoms for us to prescribe, in fact, antibiotics. So we only prescribe these antibiotics if they show like this bacteriosis and the double infection, etc. And we also need to make sure that it is prescribed for a short period of time. And the second, about the antiviral drugs.
And we know that this pandemic is due to the virus. So is it possible that we can cure the virus? Of course, this is a right way of thinking and also a good wish. However, so far, we still cannot find a very effective drug for this virus. And the WHO actually also recommended some of the medicine, and including Remdesivir. However, in clinical trial, we still haven't found its proved effectiveness. Therefore, we still now it's a symptomatic approach is a conventional treatment now. Also, because now we are treating the symptoms of the COVID-19, and the COVID-19 has various symptoms. For the Western medicine, it's very precise targeted. In other words, it will treat one symptom precisely, but this seems to be not so suitable for COVID-19 patients who suffer from various symptoms, while Chinese herbal medicine get the characteristics of multiple targets. And that's why the Chinese traditional medicine has a good advantage. And for the Chinese medicine, actually, traditional Chinese medicine covers the entire process of prevention, treatment, or rehabilitation. And its unique advantages mainly manifesting 4 aspects. Firstly, for close contacts, we can adjust the state of the body, reduce or prevent the incidence. Secondly, for mild and moderate patients, we can prevent their transition to severe and critical cases. Thirdly, for severe and critical cases, we can try to optimize, improve the cure rate, reduce the mortality rate, and improve organ function. Fourthly, for those discharged patients, traditional Chinese medicine can help patients recover and improve the quality of life. So now let us have about a 5 minutes break. And after 5 minutes break, we will continue. And during the 5 minutes break, you can also leave your questions on the message board so we can reply accordingly. 5 minutes break. So may we take 5 minutes break? 5 minutes break. Let's continue. Okay, let's continue. Yes, we can continue. Yes, we can continue. So after this COVID-19 pandemic, we already see the achievements of China's effort and results. Therefore, since last year, I was frequently asked about issues related to COVID-19. So here I would like to choose some of the frequently asked questions. And maybe there are also some of the topics you are interested. And also, if you have any relevant questions, you are welcome to raise your questions, and we can communicate and exchange online. So firstly, it's about the channel, the transmission route of COVID-19, because this is very important to prevent the COVID-19. It's even more meaningful and significant than treatment. We need to protect ourselves and our family members, our friends against the COVID-19. We need to know the transmission route of COVID-19. Also, when we need to carry out a lot of training in this aspect, and we need to further deepen our understanding in the COVID-19 for the COVID-19, we need to update our knowledge. I will give you one example. For example, the naming of this disease, this epidemic. Now we know this given name is COVID-19 and given by WHO. But if we look back in January 2020, at the beginning of February, at that time, do you still remember how WHO named this epidemic? I actually have the name of this epidemic in the year 2020. At that time, it was named. And it was named by WHO, which is also its obligation, and it's called novel coronavirus pneumonia. It means it's a kind of a new type, and pneumonia caused by coronavirus. So just after this name was adopted by gradually realized symptoms, we found that this epidemic has various or diversified symptoms. In other words, some patients, they didn't have high fever or even no fever at all. Therefore, we found that we needed to adjust the name of this epidemic in order to better reflect this disease. So now we renamed it into COVID, which is it's called COVID-19. So here you can see the naming of this disease. Actually, within the 2 years, from the original name of novel coronavirus to COVID-19, that shows that we are continuously updating our knowledge on this disease. And that is why we needed to have a updating of its transmission route. And we need to deepen our understanding of this disease. So far, we consider that the transmission route of COVID-19 is still mainly through 2 channels. One is the respiratory droplets, and the other is close contact. The respiratory droplets actually is emitted by patients sneezing, and then it contains a certain amount of a virus in the droplets. Then the droplets will float in the air for a short time and at a short distance. And if inhaled by the surrounding people, then this causes infection, that is respiratory droplets. We know the harm of the respiratory droplets. So do we know the severity of this or the distance of respiratory droplets? I asked many students, only very few can know the distance the droplets can go to. Mostly they will say maybe 1 meter or 5 meters. And very few people consider 10 meters. But according to some experiment, our respiratory droplets can travel at most 40 meters. So that is why we should pay great attention to respiratory droplets. If, for example, without a mask or unprotected, then if a patient coughs, then the surroundings will be contaminated to a very large extent without being infected. And for close contact, I will give you some scenarios. And let us see what are considered to be close contacts. So for close contact, we mean that connections between a few seconds. And then in this way, then we can try to connect their behaviors according to their timing and also their space, so as to recover the scenario to complete the what we call the transmission route or chain. Then we can find those people exposed to such risk of COVID-19. Otherwise, we can hardly find those people that we need to pay attention to. Therefore, we need to pay great attention to these two aspects and to make preparation accordingly. Then after the transmission route, what are the ways to block the transmission? And the first is isolation. Maybe people will consider. The first idea coming to people's mind is isolation. Yes, this can be a very effective measure. For example, for those inbound tourists into the country, we will adopt a kind of so-called isolation for a certain period, and then followed by isolation at home. Then only after a certain period of isolation can we allow them to travel and live freely. But this, cannot apply to the general public. So for the general public, we adopt this measure, that is to wear a mask. Wearing a mask, starting from the very beginning, we were asked about issues related to wearing masks by our overseas partners and overseas friends. At first, they asked, when should we start to wear masks? And that implies that most of the time they are safe. Only in some very highly risky occasions, then they need to wear a mask. However, due to the progress of the mask, due to the progress of the pandemic, then more and more people are used to wearing masks in their daily life. And masks become a kind of daily necessity. But still, people are asking questions about the masks. And the question changed to, when can we take off masks?
Let me share with you the Chinese experiences to judge when can you remove masks. First, you need to make sure that the area where you stay, whether it is a risk area or the epidemic area, if not, you already have the condition for make the judgment. And further, you need to see for your family members and friends and colleagues, if there are diagnosed patients. If not, then you satisfy the second condition. And the third condition is, in the place where we work, can we guarantee that we have distancing and we also have the air ventilation system? And if yes, then in the workplace and home and all outdoor space, you can choose not to wear masks. But in other places where there's a dense population, you need to put on masks again. And in our life, it is not safe just to wear masks. We also need to make sure that we need to wash hands frequently and not to rub eyes and mouth and touch nose. So we need to develop more healthy habits. Also, other frequently asked questions. For example, what are the typical symptoms of a COVID-19? As doctors, we also are also interested in this topic because we have been following this disease, and we find that there are more and more typical symptoms. So to describe these symptoms, the first category is the respirational organ symptoms, such as fever and dry cough and runny nose, which is very close to cold or flu. And after that, there are some inflammation, such as a headache or the muscle ache, etc. And you may also develop some digestion problems, such as diarrhea and the loss of appetite and the loss of your smelling capability, etc. So there are quite different symptoms, and you can use these as to judge whether you have the COVID-19 symptoms and judge for yourself if you are in danger of catching this disease. And the next question is linked to the previous question. That is, under what circumstances do you need to see a doctor? After you know the symptoms, you may find that you feel uncomfortable now and then. For example, among these symptoms, during work, you need to use a tool that is the very important tool, that is the epidemiological history. So you need to see whether you have been to these high-risk areas in 14 days, and whether you have contacted high-risk people or the diagnosed patients or the close contact of these diagnosed patients. And these two add up together to be the epidemiological history search. And if no, I would suggest that for another 1 or 2 you should go a way that we to the asymptomatic patients, or for these mild, moderate cases. First, we have isolation, homestay, and have some intervention, such as the diet, a balanced diet, and to build the immune system. Here on this slide, I have prepared a therapy. So you can select this therapy and try in your life. This is also a frequently asked question, how to make self-diagnosis, and if through diagnosis, I suspect myself to be a COVID-19 patient in the early stage, what drugs can I take? So first of all, for self-diagnosis, we need to know the related symptoms of a COVID. Just now I mentioned the respiratory symptoms, inflammation symptoms, digestion, etc., etc. All these, we need to have a basic knowledge so that we can compare whether and see whether we have a risk of a COVID-19. And the second, you also need to check the epidemiological history. And if no, then you just observe for another 1 or 2 days. And if everything's fine, then it's fine. And if after 1 or 2 days you suffer even more, then you should go to the hospital. And in the early stage, you can try some traditional Chinese medicine product. However, I need to emphasize here, the Chinese medicine, they're all OTC medicines. So you need to take with the guidance of the doctors. And we already have proven that the traditional Chinese medicine has positive effect on the patient, but they are all under the guidance of the doctors. So you can consider taking Chinese medicine, but you also need to try your best to consult the doctors available. And when you deliver the initial symptoms, the core is not to use antibiotics. Rather, you need to select the medicine according to your symptom. For example, if you cough, then you don't need to think about whether it's bacteria. You just choose the medicine that cure cough and control cough. So in the early COVID-19, it is very important and significant to choose the right medicine according to the symptoms you develop. Since the epidemic, fever was a typical symptom, and even until today, fever is still one of the criteria for COVID-19. So many people are worried about having fever, or some people even think that whenever there's a fever, it is a COVID-19. So people are very panic about fever. But not just COVID-19, many other diseases, such as the digestion problems, the stomach diseases, and will also cause the fever. So fever, it is an important indicator, but it is not the only indicator for COVID-19. So we need to make holistic diagnosis. So the core is the epidemiological history and the self-diagnosis, self-assessment. And if diagnosed, what treatment can I use? This is also what many people are interested in. And actually, I've just covered those in my slides previously. So if possible, we'll need to provide oxygen therapy because the disease first started with the lung, and the lung is the organ to provide oxygen in the body. So if the lung function is weakened, the oxygen level will drop and the blood oxygen saturation will drop. And this is very vital to the people. So whenever available, you need to inhale oxygen so that you can remain safe. And then you can also take traditional Chinese medicine to relieve the symptoms, and while waiting for the body immune system to expel the disease out of your body. People all work outside. Now, many countries have decided that we will need to coexist with the COVID-19 for the long run. So it is worthwhile to think for the external environment and our internal environment, such as our home. When we return from the outside to the inside, what should we do? When we return home, we need to clean our hands because hands are naked, are exposed to the out environment and also our clothes. So I would suggest that we put our clothes and shoes in a place where with a good ventilation so that they can be exposed to the air for like half an hour. Hands is what we need to pay more attention to. We need to wash hands frequently. And for washing hands, there's two things. First, time duration. We need to make sure that we wash at least 30 seconds. So if you don't know how long is 30 seconds, we cannot count 30, 1 to 30. So one friend recommended to me, that is to sing happy birthday twice, sing happy birthday twice, then that is 30 minutes. So I think this is a quite good method. So you can sing happy birthday to yourself for twice and count the time. And the second, we need to use a detergent or soap to wash hands. So you may ask, why do I need to use soap to wash hands? I just said, there's no drug that can kill this bacteria, but we can help to clean the bacteria so that it is not activated, because a bacteria is different from virus. Bacteria cannot independently live in the air, so it needs to be applied to something. So when it is in the air, it is like coated with a fat and exist in the environment. So no matter soap or the alcohol or detergent or any soap can help to resolve the fat that surround the bacteria so that the bacteria has no fat coated. So the bacteria will die. So now you will understand if in the future there's a COVID-19 soap in the market, this is just an advertisement, I will tell you. And masks, I recommend we use the medical level masks because it has 3 layers.
For the masks for surgical operation, they have 3 tiers, and it has the outside and also the internal side, and it's for one single use only. So it's mostly for 4-hour use. And so if the mask is contaminated or moisture, then we need to replace the masks. Also, we need to try to open our window frequently and at least about 30 minutes for every day. So today, we spend about 2 hours for the control and prevention and treatment of the COVID-19, particularly about the TCM treatment. We still have some time, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask.